intolerant und morgenfremd im eigenen Land.
Fickt euch!
Please don't come.
Es ist heute ein Experiment, wo wir alle Produkte rausgenommen haben, die nicht aus Deutschland kommen.
See this? Empty.
Kaffee nicht, kein Tee, keine Schokolade.
Oh, keine Schokolade.
Nein.
No chocolate.
Das ist krass, der Spruch ist echt krass.
Es ist nichts da.
There's nothing in there.
No, it's not a German product. I'm sorry.
Das ist doch Unsinn. Wir sind doch ein offenes Land und erst recht nicht jetzt German first.
Not German food.
Good morning, Britain. The news: a grocery chain in Germany removed all of the foreign food.
German supermarket Edeka in Hamburg made a statement against racism and celebrated diversity.
Bueno, pues un supermercado en Alemania ที่จะแสดงออกให้ผู้คนเข้าใจว่า
You see that movement? It's enough. Yes, we need the. So that's it. So we have to go and present in the note. Okay, that's it. So I wanted you to get on a tone and basic tone. So
Because
it's getting up for So what happens here is, you know, as a filmmaker, I was interested in bigger pictures, in transdisciplinary projects. So I applied for the Fletcher School, and I got the scholarship for the International Relations program. So we were all postgraduates. You can imagine something like this, but on the postgraduate level. That means we were financiers, we were, you know, filmmakers, media people, diplomats, military people, coming together for 1 year, working together around these studies of international relations, negotiations, and all that. And there where I discovered my new passion, it is the culture diplomacy. As a filmmaker, I was much more interested, you know, we learned everything around the culture diplomacy and the justice diplomacy and how America and Russia communicated through the music, through the jazz musician, and then all the scholarship around public relations started to emerge in connection with culture diplomacy. But for me, I was a filmmaker, so I was traveling the world trying to find out what is the impact of these movements on that base. So that's how I started my research. And I call my research ecoplomacy because it has a lot to do with the ecosystem. And when I started for that presentation today, I had my first map about Middle East. So when you see that map, you know, I was not much interested in the countries, but I was very much interested in the colors, the connection between the colors. Egypt, Iran, and Ethiopia. Green, yellow, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Russia. You see? So in that map, I found out some very strange, I didn't even read about it, but there are connections. Why are similar colors? And here is a map where I found out about languages, Arab languages. And I was shocked because I am part of half of Egypt, because I don't talk Saidi of Upper Egypt. So I am actually a citizen. In my language, I am not even an Egyptian, I'm half Egyptian, because I am born and I can only talk in Egypt. in Egyptian. So if I have to try to connect to any of these so-called Arab world or Arab countries, I have actually to talk either in English or French. You know, I am actually lucky because my Egyptian is connected to a lot of people will read and see the films of the Egyptian. So I am actually more lucky than anybody else. But you see that. You see where the, you know, where the problem here is. I found another map here for my preparation, and that is really interesting. This is the other way around, the perspective of Egyptians about the world. So, or the perspective of the Arabs around the world. So they are in the center of the world. You see that? And whole Brazil is connected to Maradona, to the football. Here it's too far. Cheap, China, you see that. So what is happening here? You have prejudices. You have ideas. You are born with beliefs, with images in your mind when you are born in a country, you see? And these beliefs and values, they are so solid, so rigid, yeah? So my questions were, when I started the whole research around culture diplomacy on the grassroots level, my question was very natural: what is the impact of the artist? Very naturally, I am an artist. I am not only an artist, I'm also a filmmaker. You know, I have been connected to many transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary artists around me, so it was very natural for me to start the research around the artist and the impact of the artist. When I was in the school, it started with the Nile project, the Nile Music Project. You know all about the transboundary water conflict, and the Nile Music Project brought all of these artists together to make, to make a concert every year to travel the African world and the international world to create awareness around that conflict. And something happened that was like magic. Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia were almost on a war, verge of war. There were no negotiations, they were stalled. And suddenly you would hear the song of Dina Woudedi in Sudan all over the radios. And then in Egypt, there was a taboo to talk about the conflict of water. So it started to raise an awareness about the conflict of water. And then something happened with the negotiations. It moved the negotiations. And now we are actually on a very good road towards at least understanding. Collaboration is not yet there. So for me, it was very interesting to understand the artist as an agent of change. I have done a lot of research about norm entrepreneurship and leadership. I have asked myself, what is the culture diplomat? Is this the artist? So Joan Chanuk is one of the main researchers about culture diplomacy, and she was addressing the secretary, Mrs. Rice, the U.S. State Secretary. And she clearly tells her, listen to the artists. Why? Because they are connected to international collaborations. They have always a movement from artist to artist and movement from artist to audience. And they are eager to share values, they have mutual respect because they work together, they are curious about each other. And they respect also, as Yara was telling us yesterday, they respect the difference. So they are actually the cultural diplomats. Why? Can we try to find out why? Why is it that the artist in itself, independent of the state movements, of the funding institutions that send an artist here and there, why is an artist a culture diplomat? Here I found some aspects for you, some cornerstones where you try to understand. For example, an artist who have been out of Egypt, for example, for a few years and come back is he an outsider when he comes back or when she comes back? Is she an insider? No, she's not an insider anymore because she somehow went out and found out other experiences and got some other horizons. So she is not really an insider and she's not really an outsider. So there is a hyphen here, you know, there is a bridge. There is a kind of, yes, it's like connecting waters, underground waters. And for me, I try to find out the concepts of this bridging movement of an artist. And I found out, I have here 3 concepts that I always work with. It's the traveler, the porter, and the walker. Why? Because when you are an artist, like I'm reminding myself now of my colleague, Su'udat Karahan, who made her film in Syria, and she couldn't even film in Syria, so she filmed in Lebanon about the experience of a war, and then she was invited to Egypt to the Gona Film Festival, and she didn't get the visa, so you see the borders. But her film crossed the border because the festival showed the film, and I was trying all the time to understand her message because she said, look, I am not here, but I am here through my film. So we connect later and we discuss later. So the art transverse the border. You see that? Nora, I mean, for example, I have shown you actually, where I am now, what happens here? Oh, something happened here. Oh, are we going back or forward? I'm not a PC person, I'm sorry. Yes, okay. So Nora Amin is one of the most pioneers of performance and participative performance in Egypt. She's working now actually since 40 years to bring theater performance to the people, on the streets, to the schools, in Egypt and everywhere. And just 2 days ago, she had a performance in a German school. And she said about it, yesterday, something big happened in my life. I acted in Germany for the first time in my life. And there were children from 6 to 12 years old, and they were just drawn with her. And she said that was actually for her exactly that experience that we are trying to convey here, you know. It's just a cultural experience beyond any borders, beyond any ages, and beyond any cultures, because she had to, you know, I can show you, I don't know what I'm doing here, maybe I can do it like that. You know, it was a school landscape and a school stage, and she had actually a kind of a silk board to, you know, drawn one, and it was in Germany in a beautiful autumn day, and she plays with these puppets, but she dances also, and she sings, and she talks in German. You see that? So she's trying to connect. She's trying to bridge. Yeah. So here I have a definition for you about a norm entrepreneur. So norm entrepreneurs are critical for norm emergence because they call attention to issues or even create issues by using language that names, interprets, and dramatizes them. You see that? An artist is always trying, if it's a storyteller or if it's a painter, it's trying to put it in a kind of a very dramatic and very ambiguous and an abstract way, so it can connect to you, okay? So we have here, because everybody would talk to me and ask me this question, yeah, but it's interesting, very interesting thing, the grassroots level, they move all the time, they do all the projects, what the hell, you know. It is not connected to stakeholders, it's not connected to politics, it's not even connected to policy making. So what the hell, what is the impact? And you can see this. We have a world of displacement and disconnection, you know, but I never had that emergence of questioning and awareness around immigrants as I had the past 2 or 3 years. I am actually myself an immigrant. I came here to Berlin 30 years ago. We didn't have all of these questions. I was totally alone. Nobody even talked to me about the awareness that I left my culture and I'm in a new culture. There was no questioning, no awareness about all of these things. And now it is like popping up, you know, into the awareness of the people. In the good and in the bad. So you all know, if you are connected to culture diplomacy, about the writings of Samuel Huntington, who brought this, this concept forward about clash of civilizations. And we did discuss a lot about it. You know, we were in the class, in our class, it was exactly like you. We were coming from all over the world. So we didn't see any clashes of civilization. We were actually working together this whole year, very knitted, because it was a very hard program. We had 11 classes and masters in 1 year. And we had our work, so we were very knitted. So we discussed a lot about that clash of civilization. And I found out, you know, people who crossed the border of their own culture, like Edward Said, for example, they very naturally will, you know, they will bring it up that this is a world of mixtures, of migrations and crossing overs, of boundaries, and all the boundaries are traversed. And so you see that. Thank you so much. So you can see where I'm going to. You know, I'm taking you onto that journey. And every artwork has a lot to do with polyphony and with inclusion, with infusion, with ambiguity, you know. It has a lot of levels. An artwork has always a lot of levels. And Homi Bhabha, you know, a scholar, another scholar, he was talking about the third space of in-between culture. You see that? It's almost like, you know, there is, I don't know if you have seen about that artist who has built a rope between the two towers. It was before the 2001, of course. He built a wire rope between the two towers and just walked that path between the two towers. You see that? This is the in-between space. You know, French. Yes. French? Yes. Yeah. Yes. I didn't show it here because it's very hard to show videos during a presentation. But it is exactly what is, this is the image that you can have for an artist who passes through cultures. You know, back and forth. You know, it is like a walking on that rope and then balancing, and you know, it can be a fall down, you know. So today, for my presentation, you know, I was thinking, because every time because I have a lot of case studies about artists, and so this time I was thinking that I analyze my own film and the movement of my own film. And it was interesting because Egyptian Jeanne d'Arc started in 2011. It started actually, I was showing another movie of mine, and it was made in Simony, and that movie was in the AUC, very near to Tahrir Space. And it was a very, very, very quiet movie in the desert about Bedouin women. And outside, there was a lot of shooting. It was in the middle of the Arab Spring in January 2011. And nobody left the room. Nobody. It was like an act of resistance to stay there and watch that move. So something happened in me, and then I started to understand that I am, as an artist and filmmaker, I have to be part of that movement. I'm not part of the movement on the street because it was a political decision of myself to not be on the streets, but I had this feeling that I have to listen to these women, to these people, to find out what is moving now, what is happening here, you know, why now? There was always in January protests in Egypt, always, about 10 years ago, but why now? Why it is exploding now? So I started to listen to my colleagues, mostly women, to their stories on the streets, the stories out of the streets, and I started to write, and then I started to make a concept about documentary, but it didn't work, so I tried to make a fiction out of it. It didn't work. I went through whole process of how to do that film about these women, and then we started to work on the resistance, a daily resistance, because you have to understand, these women, mostly artists, their son or their brother or their best friend would die in the morning, and in the evening they had to go on stage. Okay? Next morning you wake up, 2 people had to leave the country. It was too risky. Okay? The next morning you wake up, there was a gang raping. 3 women were gang raped from 300 people on the street. You see that? So how can you work and live in that space? So this is the movement of resilience, okay? So I started to understand how these women, there were women in my film, how they work. So they worked through their art. They resisted. They just went on working, painting, going to stage, exercising 8 hours, 10 hours a day, just every morning going to the streets, out of the streets, in the streets. There is all of this resistant movement. And when I analyzed the movement of my film, I wanted it to make it very, very personal today. Why? Because I wanted to show you where it begins in the subjective, in the personal, and how it swirls around and becomes a big movement like the Attica video. So of course, I had problems with funding, and then I went to Tarifa, to the Africa Produce. I went to many markets to find the funding, and then the funding came actually from Tunisia, but the money came from Doha. You see that movement? And we were finally able to make that movie, and then it had its premiere where? It didn't have its premiere in Egypt. It has its premiere in Dubai International Film Festival. Why? Because that is the biggest, now it is gone, the festival, but by that time in 2016 it was the biggest film festival in Arab world, and to make your premiere there, it's like an A festival in Cannes. Okay? So what happened is we had not only screenings, but we had also a concert. We had to celebrate that movie, 7 years in the making, so we had to celebrate that movie. So an artist, an Egyptian artist, Lina Boudedi, came to Dubai and gave a concert. You see that movement? I'm not trying to praise myself here. I'm trying to show you how it moves, how it swirls, how it connects. So that movie went, from there to Kazakhstan, and then it made its Europe festival tour. And there are 2 festivals that I would like to connect here as points. There is the Malmö Arab Film Festival in Sweden and the Tübingen Film Festival. Why I want to show these 2 examples? Because these are some of my protagonists. Interesting here, that was the premiere in Egypt. What was the subject? A matter of perspective. You see that? You see the quantum leap, the changing of perspectives. So the film went to Kazakhstan, and then it went to Tübingen. And here I show you something. In Malmö and in Tübingen, our film festivals are connected to projects with immigrants. What that means is that immigrants are actually running the festival in all its administrative and all its conceptual and all its movement. So you have here a kind of an Arabic, what can I say? Can I say a cultural bomb inside a city like Malmö or inside a small city like Tübingen? Do you have an idea about Tübingen? It's a very small student city. And then this is like a nuclear, you know. This, when they make a concept like this, a festival like this, and then the people start to discuss. You see, that was in Köln. And then it goes, okay, it went to Kazakhstan, then it went to a China Women Film Festival that toured all China and Hong Kong, and then it came back to Egypt. What is the most of the joy for an Egyptian filmmaker? I'm not actually an Egyptian filmmaker, but I am. So what is the most joy? It's coming back home with a movie after 7 years in the making. So here I'm showing you, we did, of course, it was in the Cairo International Film Festival, the first screening, but we did community work. More precious for me was to sit down with the women or with the people on the ground and discuss and listen to emotions, to things that are coming up 7 years after the uprising. You see, there is a movement here of reflection, a movement of contemplation, and also a movement of events, and a kind of an arc of a story, you know. And the story was not politically, was not really nice. We are in a military regime, but what happens underneath is a lot of questioning, a lot of emotions coming up. You see that we sit down. This is the protagonist of my film. These are colleagues. These, you know, very normal people. They just start to talk together on a local movement. You see, festivals are global movements. Here are local movements. I'm concluding now because I want you to really discuss about it. So what happens here? You know, how is this movement generated of collaboration? So one of the main aspects here is the deep listening. You don't listen with your ears, you don't listen with your views, you don't listen with everything that you have as an idea or propaganda or whatever, or no, you just listen. You sit down and listen. And it's like tuning of instruments. You know, look at this. They were sitting on the ground and just listening to each other. And here is a movement that I would like to show you. It's about the learning and teaching and relearning. You know, in our modern world, we have this quantum learning, and it's a very similar movement here. Because what you have to do is, remind yourself from that map about the central of the world, and Maradona is Brazil, and the cheap things is China. You start to shift your learning. You start to shift your prejudices. You start to at least be aware of your prejudices and your beliefs and your ideas about anything in this world. And then you relearn. You come back to it with another movement of awareness and learning. And then you reconnect. And then we talk a lot in our modern world about the co-collaboration, also in the business. We have this co-leadership, you know. So what happens here is that we have a movement that is on the base. Okay? And it connects. And then it gains momentum. And that momentum has a movement from down to up. Okay, if there is not a movement, we have the movement of the stakeholders. It is from up to down. And there is a movement where it swirls together You know, you have this movement. I showed you an image of the Goethe Institute because Goethe Institute is in the middle. It's an institutional institute, but it has a lot of grassroots aspects in its walls, and in its mechanism. Because actually, the Goethe Institutes in the countries are actually very independent in some ways. So, I believe that this is the movement that we need now. We don't need the up-to-down movement, and we don't need that movement. I found a beautiful image for it. We don't need that grassroots movement to break the pyramid, because it didn't work. You can see it in all of the actions, the political actions. What we need is a kind of a yin and yang, two currents coming together, and then there will be a kind of an interaction, and then can come a shift. So I had a kind of a vision, just to conclude that. So I researched about the Arab film festivals in the Arab world, first of all, and you see how many it is. It's not really much. And my film was shown in the Arab world, in Lebanon, in Palestine, and Sudan, and I wasn't able to pass the borders. Even in Palestine, I was actually on the other side of the border. I was in Sinai, I was in the Red Sea. I would have passed the Eilat border and I would have been in Palestine, but I wasn't able. I have an Egyptian passport. So we had to make a video conference. You see that? So what are the Arab film festivals in the world? We have some, 5, 6, 7 film festivals. So we have this, I don't know if you know about this, we have this Earth Day Film Festival. Do you know about this? Somebody knows about this? This is a vision about one woman created it. It was in the context of the TED conference, and she won the prize with her vision. She wanted to have one day where everywhere in the world, one program is shown everywhere in the world. From big cinemas to small communities, it's everywhere. And it is called the Earth Day Film Festival. And it is very connected to the ecological system. And I envisioned something like that with an Arab film festival. You know, like one day where everywhere in the world, small communities everywhere, big festivals, show on one day Arab films. Arab, it can be only films, it can be a kind of a context, cultural context, I don't even know. But just imagine if we have one day something like that. What can be created out of such an utopia? So here is something that all of that talk is around that ecosystem, around these channels that come and connect together, you see. And I love that quote from Miklit Hadero. She's Ethiopian American. And she says, "Last month I was on the Lake Tana in Ethiopia, the source of the Blue Nile, perched on the tiny motorboat and singing to myself, watching the clouds make their way across the sky. And I thought to myself, these clouds are the Nile in the sky, the rainfall becomes the lake becomes the river becomes the sea, and all along the way the systems that feed this river are more broadly the systems that feed all rivers and all watersheds and all of us. We are interconnected, and we want to know what that sounds like." Thank you for listening. Yes. Of course. I just love that moment of silence.
Go ahead.
I wanted to go back to your first point, which is, I think, one of the major points. And it was the one about why are artists agents of change, why do they cross borders and cultures, and why do they have this intensive open dialogue with interculturality. And I just want to throw one aspect into the discussion as an artist who's worked in different places. And I think it's got to do with openness in general and a curiosity about the way you look at the world. And that the curiosity leads you to question everything and to try to reach some kind of essential truth in what you do as an artist. And that means you are open also for other cultures and for other things that are different to your own. And whenever you encounter them, you try to grasp what fascinates you about them as well. And this process, this whole process of searching, it creates a kind of openness which makes it possible to encompass many other kinds of lifestyles. It's just one way of looking at it.
I see a lot of questions in your mind.
I thought it was quite interesting what you said, that the grassroots movement doesn't need to break through sort of to the upper level, doesn't need to go in that vertical motion. But for you personally, as a practitioner of this, is there sort of an ideal end goal to the ecology of grassroots movements, and as they all interconnect, is there a point where you can say, like, we did it? You know, if it's not breaking down a power structure necessarily, what do you think is your ideal for the result of all of this?
You know, if I call my work ecoplomacy, is that I'm very affiliated to the nature and to the laws of nature. So I observe the nature. And I just give you one example. There was a reservoir in the US, was dying. There was an override of one of the animals, power animals, and then it just took off all of the trees, and then the whole ecology of that reservoir was dying. And then they introduced wolves again to that reservoir. I have shown that video once, but here it's very hard to show videos and presentations. I have shown that video once, and it was amazing to see what happened when you introduced a few wolves back to that reservoir. In a timeline of 10 years, you see the timelines of the grassroots movements are not 1 or 2 years like the funding. It moves on a non-linear circular movement. So when they introduced the wolves, something amazing happened. The override of that animal eliminated because the wolves were stronger, and then started to bring the equilibrium, the balance, into that reservoir again, even to the point that is actually flown and flowered again, and it's now one of the most visited reservoirs in the US. You see that? Can you see that movement? This is the movement that I'm talking about. Yes?
I want to know more about the movie that took you 7 years to finish. What inspired you to do the movie, and what the story briefly is about?
If everybody's interested, because I didn't want to talk actually too much about myself, I wanted to talk about the movement of the film. So if everybody's interested, I can do that.
Yes. We are already 15 minutes late. So yeah, I don't know if.
I will just give a brief moment about that movie. I told you how it started. It started inside of the fire of the Tahrir place. So what I didn't want to do is a documentary about a few women who are resisting. And I didn't want to make a movie about the revolution. And I didn't want to make a movie about political aspects. So what happened is that I started to understand why I'm doing that movie, and we started to work from the grassroots level. We started to work with these stories of the women. And then I started, when I got the funding from Tunisia, I started to go and shoot with women. And I started to read, to listen to these stories. So I found out that the artwork is very important. So I started to put poetry and paintings in that movie and to work with them. So you will have about 5 protagonists in the movie. They are telling actually a story about a Bedouin girl, a fictive Bedouin girl who came from the desert to the city, went into the swirling pool of the revolution, and started to dance. And then she got caught from the police, and because she was one day in the prison, she was ashamed. She was ashamed for her tribe. So they looked for her and sent her to the desert to die. So it has a lot to do with the story of Egypt, of Jeanne d'Arc. So I titled that movie Egyptian Jeanne d'Arc. It has a lot to do with the sense of resistance and resilience. And it has a lot to do with the art expression of that whole movement. You know, you see that movement was euphoria, and then it went up into a Muslim regime, now into a military regime. And so it was an arc of a story that I tried to tell through artwork and through through very clear documentary interviews with the women from Egypt.
Sorry, we have to close now for questions, but we can continue the coffee break after the presentation, a various presentation, if you don't mind.
Of course, maybe I talked too long. I thought I was talking not too long.
No, it's great. It was great.
I wanted actually to give you more space.
Thank you.